Today, we're plunging into a topic that weaves itself into the fabric of our lives, often without us even noticing its profound influence. It's a subject that can spark, well, really intense debate, yet it's rarely discussed with the nuance it deserves. So let me start with a few questions for you, our listener, just to get us thinking. When you consider how men should behave, what comes to mind?
Yep, what's that picture?
Are there certain characteristics, beliefs, or even attitudes that you maybe instinctively label as unmanly? And critically, do you, or perhaps someone you know, hold a particularly limiting or, rigid view of what it truly means to be a man?
Those are big questions.
They really aren't simple questions, are they? And the answers, well, they often reveal more about our societal conditioning.
Right, what we've learned.
Than about inherent truths. That's why today our mission is to embark on a deep dive into cutting through all the noise surrounding the often controversial subject of toxic versus healthy masculinity. We've gathered a stack of sources, from insightful articles, rigorous research, to varied perspectives gleaned from candid online discussions, and even a revealing YouTube series, to bring you the most important nuggets of knowledge. Our goal is to give you a powerful shortcut to being truly well-informed on this vital topic.
Yeah, and this deep dive, it's about more than just definitions or, dry facts. We promise to uncover some surprising insights that might challenge your preconceived notions.
Hopefully.
Offer practical takeaways you can apply to your own life, your relationships, and even weave in enough humor and relatable anecdotes to keep you genuinely hooked. Our overarching goal is to ensure you gain knowledge quickly but thoroughly, without ever feeling overwhelmed by information overload.
Right.
We're here to spark those aha moments, helping you connect the dots in a really meaningful and memorable way, providing depth and practical wisdom you won't find just skimming headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Before we even approach the concept of toxic and all the connotations that word carries, we need to lay a foundational understanding.
Absolutely. Start at the start.
What exactly is masculinity? It's a word that's thrown around constantly, but what does it truly signify, at its core?
That's the perfect starting point, because it's a concept often misunderstood. At its core, masculinity simply refers to the qualities, attributes, and behaviors that societies typically associate with the male gender.
Okay, so societal associations.
Exactly. And this is a crucial distinction to make right from the outset. There's absolutely nothing inherently problematic or toxic about masculinity itself.
Right, that's key.
Just being a man or exhibiting traits traditionally seen as masculine is not the issue. The nuance lies in how these traits are expressed and what definition of masculinity is being adhered to.
That's a really vital distinction, because it's easy for the term toxic masculinity to be misinterpreted, right? Leading some to believe it implies that all masculinity is inherently bad, or that being a man is somehow problematic.
Precisely. That's a common misunderstanding.
But you're clarifying that's not the case at all. So what are some of those positive qualities that our sources identify as traditionally masculine that, when expressed healthily, are actually incredibly valuable?
Yeah, there are many. Our sources highlight a range of very positive qualities often considered masculine. These include things like a desire to protect others, whether that's, physical protection, emotional safeguarding, or protecting a family's well-being.
Protection in a broad sense.
In a broad sense, yes. It also encompasses the drive to provide for family members, which, as you pointed out, isn't just about financial provision. It can be about practical support, emotional stability, or ensuring a safe environment.
Okay.
Then there's showing determination, perseverance, or courage. When expressed healthily, masculinity can genuinely motivate incredibly positive behaviors. Think about the unwavering commitment to finishing a difficult task.
Yeah, sticking with it.
The resolve to keep a promise, even when it's challenging. Showing profound bravery during times of uncertainty, or the ambition to set and achieve significant goals. These are all traditionally masculine traits that, when channeled constructively, contribute enormously to personal growth, strong relationships, and a thriving society.
Right.
They are about building, not destroying.
That truly makes so much sense. It's about the expression and the intent behind these traits. But you also brought up something important, that certain aspects of what we perceive as masculinity are social constructs.
A very important point.
Can you elaborate on that? Because for many, it feels like these rules about men are just innate, part of their biological makeup.
They often feel innate because they're so deeply entrenched, so consistently reinforced, from childhood onwards, that they become internalized as normal or natural for men.
Right, just the way things are.
Exactly. But yes, many aspects, like The belief that men are inherently less emotional than women, or that they should naturally hold more authority in public and private life, or that they're simply less likely to ask for help, are in fact social constructs.
Okay, not biology.
Not biology. They are cultural norms, learned behaviors, not biological truths. For example, the pervasive idea that men are logical rather than emotional is a deeply ingrained belief in many societies, but it's not supported by biology. Men, like all humans, possess a full range of emotions. Their expression is often curtailed by societal expectations. Recognizing that these are learned behaviors, shaped by culture, upbringing, media, peer pressure, it makes it much easier to question them, to critically examine them, and ultimately to challenge them.
Right. Gives you permission to question.
It opens the door to understanding that masculinity isn't a fixed, rigid concept, but something fluid, dynamic, and capable of evolving to be more inclusive and beneficial for everyone.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and perhaps where some of the confusion and even controversy often lies. This term, toxic masculinity.
The buzzword.
Yeah, it has gained a lot of traction in recent years, and sometimes it feels like it's thrown around without a clear, precise understanding of what it actually means. So what differentiates it from just masculinity in general? What specifically makes it toxic?
This is a critical distinction that often gets lost in public discourse. Toxic masculinity is a term that describes a narrow, harmful, and extremely rigid definition of what it means to be a man.
Narrow, harmful, rigid. Got it.
And it is absolutely vital to clarify that it does not mean that all masculinity is bad or that men, by their nature, are bad or inherently problematic.
Super important clarification.
Instead, the term toxic masculinity aims to hold abusive behaviors accountable and simultaneously to elevate men's potential to grow into their full, authentic, and healthy selves. The toxic part emerges when traditionally positive masculine traits like confidence, competitiveness, or strength are taken to an extreme, exaggerated to the point where they become damaging.
Ah, the exaggeration.
Yes. And this damage isn't just inflicted upon others. It is profoundly, deeply damaging to the man himself, limiting his emotional range, his relationships, and his overall well-being.
So it's about the excess and the misapplication of these traits rather than the traits themselves, like a good quality taken to an unhealthy extreme.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Could you give us some common phrases or underlying beliefs that really embody this toxic definition, the things that really plant these damaging seeds?
Oh, definitely. Think about phrases we've all heard, perhaps even used, or certainly had directed at us.
Yeah.
Boys don't cry.
Classic.
Man up. Don't be weak. Or real men don't do X. These seemingly simple phrases, repeated over a lifetime, plant incredibly deep and insidious beliefs.
They really sink in.
They do. They condition boys and men to believe that a real man must be stoic to the point of emotional emptiness, aggressive, emotionally cold, fiercely competitive to the exclusion of cooperation, and always in control of himself, of others, of situations.
Wow. That's a lot to live up to.
It is. And our sources make it abundantly clear. This isn't strength. This is a form of emotional suppression and a profound misunderstanding of what genuine strength actually is.
Right. It's a performance of strength.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates a facade that, while appearing strong on the outside, is often brittle and deeply isolating on the inside.
And that ties into a really powerful analogy I saw in one of our sources, the suit of armor.
Ah, yes, the suit of armor.
Can you tell us more about how that analogy perfectly captures the essence of living under the dictates of toxic masculinity?
The suit of armor analogy is exceptionally apt and profound. Living life determined to never appear weak, always putting up an impenetrable front, is precisely like constantly wearing a heavy, cumbersome suit of armor.
Right. You can picture it.
On the surface, it might seem protective. It keeps you safe from perceived threats of vulnerability, judgment, or perceived weakness. But the reality is, it's utterly exhausting.
Must be.
It's limiting, preventing genuine human connection and true self-confidence, because you're always forced to maintain an artificial, impenetrable facade. This armor, while seemingly strong, actually prevents you from engaging with the world authentically.
Yeah, keeps people out.
Our sources emphasize that to cultivate genuine, meaningful relationships, the kind that truly nourish you, and to develop true, lasting self-confidence, you have to let others know who you really are without that armor.
Okay, that takes vulnerability.
It requires vulnerability, which is so often confused with weakness in a toxic masculine framework. But in reality, vulnerability is profound strength. It takes immense courage to take off that armor, even for a moment, and show your authentic self.
Right. The courage to be seen.
The paradox is that in striving for an image of strength, men often become less resilient as they deny themselves the emotional processing necessary to truly move past setbacks and build genuine inner fortitude.
So if that's what toxic masculinity looks like, this restrictive, heavily armored existence, what does healthy or real masculinity actually look like? If we're taking off the armor, what replaces it, and how does it manifest in a man's life?
Well, in stark contrast to the rigidity and suppression of toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity involves someone being comfortable with themselves as a man,
Okay. Self-acceptance.
without feeling the need to act in specific prescribed ways or to avoid doing certain things simply because they might be considered too feminine by outdated societal norms.
Right. Freeing yourself from those labels.
Exactly. And crucially, it also involves encouraging this same freedom and comfort in others, fostering an environment where all individuals can be their authentic selves. It's about deep self-acceptance and actively fostering acceptance and inclusivity in your community and relationships.
It sounds like it's a much more expansive and liberating concept than the narrow, rigid definitions we just discussed. It's about personal freedom within one's identity.
Precisely. Healthy masculinity is not a monolithic, one-size-fits-all concept. It's much more inclusive, adaptable, and constructive, allowing for a broad and diverse spectrum of expressions.
Okay. More flexible.
For instance, men rooted in healthy masculinity can be emotionally expressive. They can openly articulate their feelings, whether that's joy, sadness, fear, or vulnerability, without feeling emasculated or weak.
Which is huge.
Huge. They can have deeply meaningful female friends or mentors, valuing and learning from their perspectives without feeling threatened or needing to assert dominance. It embraces traits like responsibility, taking accountability for one's actions, and leadership that arises from wisdom and collaboration, not from ego or dominance.
Leadership with ego versus without. Big difference.
Absolutely. It's about strength, tempered with compassion and empathy. It actively recognizes that gender roles are largely social constructs and encourages individuality and authenticity rather than denying personal preferences or forcing conformity.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's about living a life that aligns with your own deeply held beliefs and values rather than conforming to someone else's rigid, outdated rules about what a man should be. This allows for a much richer, more fulfilling existence.
Okay, let's dive deeper into those specific toxic traits because understanding them clearly, in detail, is absolutely key to recognizing them, in ourselves and in the world around us.
Definitely. Got to know what we're looking for.
What's the first and perhaps most prominent one you want to tackle?
One of the most prominent and, frankly, damaging features of toxic masculinity is the systemic suppression of emotions.
Ah, the emotional lockdown.
Pretty much. This belief system dictates that men must deny, suppress, and ultimately disown nearly all emotions. It operates under the flawed premise that real men are primarily logical, rational beings rather than emotional ones.
Right, the logic versus emotion fallacy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Within this incredibly narrow framework, the only emotions truly deemed acceptable for men are anger and often lust.
Anger and lust, that's it.
Pretty much the main ones that get a pass. Any other emotions, sadness, fear, vulnerability, tenderness, joy, even deep affection, is often labeled as weak or feminine, and therefore to be avoided at all costs.
So, if a man is experiencing something as universally human as sadness, disappointment, or even profound grief, he's effectively told to push that down.
Push it down, yeah.
That it's unmanly or a sign of weakness to feel it, let alone express it.
Exactly. Insisting that you're not upset by something, whether it's a huge professional disappointment, a personal betrayal, the loss of a loved one, or even a minor setback, is an incredibly challenging and psychologically draining endeavor.
Sounds exhausting.
It forces the mind to work tirelessly, erecting internal barriers to suppress natural human reactions.
Yeah.
And here's the crucial, insidious part. Suppressed emotions don't simply vanish.
Right. They have to go somewhere.
Our sources and a wealth of psychological research consistently highlight that in time, these unacknowledged emotions inevitably reemerge, often in distorted or destructive forms. Most commonly, they surface as the only acceptable emotion for men practicing toxic masculinity.
Anger.
So the anger is often misplaced sadness or fear.
Very often. You see this play out frequently when someone seems disproportionately angry or aggressive about a minor inconvenience or explodes over something seemingly trivial. It's often pent-up, unprocessed emotions finally finding a permissible outlet.
That makes a lot of sense.
While men who suppress their emotions might create the illusion of being unaffected or less bothered by difficulties, studies show they're actually more impacted and for longer than those who allow themselves to experience, process, and learn from their emotional reactions.
Wow. So it actually backfires.
Massively. This suppression, intended to project strength, actually undermines genuine resilience and leads to a persistent, simmering internal conflict. That connects so powerfully to something really interesting I heard in one of our sources, the Say Less YouTube video. They offered a fascinating and at times quite humorous perspective on this cultural aspect of suppressing emotions.
Yeah, that was a great segment.
Even something as simple as expressing, "I miss you." Can you elaborate on that anecdote and what it reveals?
Absolutely. The Say Less discussion, particularly the segment on male friendships, provided a truly fascinating and stark illustration of how deeply this emotional suppression can go, especially through specific cultural lenses.
Like the Ghanaian context they mentioned.
Exactly. They described a Ghanaian cultural context where even a simple text like, "I miss you," between male friends is seen as too feminine, or surprisingly, even associated with homosexuality.
Wow, really?
Yeah. The hosts explicitly stated that in their environment, we've created an impression that we've associated "I miss you" with homosexuality. It is too feminine for a guy. This is a powerful example of how a cultural norm can completely shut down a natural, benign human emotion.
That's intense.
It's not about the emotion itself, but how it's filtered and perceived through an incredibly rigid, fear-based lens of masculinity.
Wow, that's incredibly specific and highlights how arbitrary these rules can be, yet how powerfully they constrain. It's not about what the emotion actually is, but how it's perceived through this very rigid cultural filter.
Precisely. The host's frank discussion truly underscores how deeply ingrained these societal conditionings are against male emotional expression. They even contrasted it implicitly with what might be commonplace in other cultures. They mentioned, for example, that in French culture, such expressions of affection or longing between male friends might not carry any negative connotation.
Right? Different norms.
Simply because their cultural norms allow for a broader range of male emotional expression without assigning a negative gendered or sexualized meaning. This comparison serves as the stark reminder that these are indeed cultural norms, learned behaviors, not inherent male traits. Yeah. It really illustrates how this single, all-encompassing rule, "never show weakness," forces men to suppress a great deal of their authentic selves, even their tender feelings for their friends, leading to emotional constriction and isolation. This fear of being perceived as soft or unmanly is a powerful self-perpetuating trap.
That's incredibly insightful. Let's move on to the next core trait, because I imagine it's closely related to that desire for strength and control that we've just started to uncover.
It is indeed. The second core trait of toxic masculinity is the relentless pursuit of power and control.
Okay. Power and control.
According to the beliefs deeply embedded in toxic masculinity, power, authority, and the ability to exert control over others are considered among the most important, if not the most important, indicators of manliness.
Right. Manliness, control.
Therefore, men are often subtly or overtly encouraged to attempt to gain and maintain dominance over anyone considered weaker than them. And unfortunately, this often specifically targets women, based on the harmful and baseless assumption that all women are inherently weaker than men, and thus fit for subjugation.
So it's not just about having influence or being effective in the leadership role, but about having dominance, a top-down, non-negotiable form of power.
Exactly. While wanting to gain influence, to be effective or to lead, is not inherently harmful. In fact, it can be a very positive masculine trait.
Sure. Healthy leadership.
It becomes dangerous when power is treated purely as a status symbol, an end in itself, and when damaging or abusive behaviors are considered acceptable methods to acquire or maintain that power.
Okay. The how matters.
Massively. Men adhering to these beliefs may stubbornly refuse to listen to others' perspectives, refuse to compromise, be unwilling to change their minds even when presented with new information, or admit when they've made a mistake.
Why? What's the fear?
Because they're afraid it will make them appear less powerful, less in control, or less manly. This can also manifest as mistreating people, dismissing their opinions, or even overtly disrespecting them in an attempt to assert their authority.
Right. Pushing others down to feel bigger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This approach, of course, inevitably creates conflict, fosters resentment, and ultimately drives people away, leading to isolation rather than genuine respect or connection.
And what about the concept of respect in this context? How does that play into the pursuit of power? Does it get twisted?
Oh, absolutely twisted. Our sources note a significant distortion here. rather than striving to earn genuine respect through consistent positive actions, integrity, and building an esteemed reputation.
Yeah, the normal way.
Some men with unhealthy beliefs about masculinity mistakenly think they deserve to be respected simply because of their manly nature or their perceived status as a man.
Entitlement, basically.
Entitlement, exactly. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of what true respect is. True respect is earned through character, through actions, through how you treat others, and through your contributions. It's not something that can be demanded or assumed based on gender.
Right, you can't force respect.
This often leads to a cycle where men demand respect, but fail to embody the behaviors that would naturally command it, leading to frustration and further aggressive attempts to enforce their will.
That distinction between demanded power and earned respect is crucial. And this pursuit of power and control seems to lead directly to the next point, which feels like a natural, maybe dark progression from that need for dominance.
It does. The third trait is responding to all threats and challenges, whether real or perceived, with aggression or violence.
Okay. Aggression as the default response.
This particular trait goes hand in hand with the need for men to embody power, as they're often encouraged to gain and maintain authority through physical aggression or the credible threat of it.
Right. Might makes right, essentially.
Within this framework, aggression itself is not just a means to an end. It's often considered a direct and undeniable sign of masculinity, a virtue in itself.
So it's not just a survival mechanism, but aggression is seen as a virtue, a desirable quality for a real man to possess. That's concerning.
In a toxic masculine framework, yes, absolutely. Men and boys are subtly, and sometimes overtly, encouraged to become aggressive, even when there are much better, more constructive, and healthier responses available.
Yeah, like talking.
And even when such behavior is entirely unwarranted or disproportionate to the situation. This is precisely why statistics consistently show that men and boys get into fights at significantly higher rates than women.
Right. The numbers back it up.
Toxic masculinity promotes the idea that physical aggression is an appropriate, even necessary response to tense interactions, perceived disrespect, teasing, or even just differing opinions. This rigid adherence to aggression leads men to experience avoidable conflicts that are rarely, if ever, resolved in healthy or constructive ways.
Because resolving it peacefully is seen as
Weak. Precisely because negotiating, compromising, or seeking peaceful resolution are often seen as signs of weakness, of being soft or unmanly. The cycle perpetuates itself, leading to chronic conflict and strained relationships.
The Say Less video had a very poignant and relatable anecdote about this, didn't it? Something that really brought home the societal pressure.
They did indeed. One of the hosts recalled a very personal situation where, if someone disrespected his wife, he felt an intense compulsion, fueled by societal pressure, to fight them, even if he knew, logically, he wasn't physically capable of winning or that it wasn't the wisest course of action.
Wow. Even against his better judgment.
Exactly. He recounted how an ex-partner would literally ask, "Aren't you going to do anything about it?" if he didn't immediately resort to violence.
Oof. Direct pressure.
Yeah. This perfectly illustrates the profound external and internalized pressure men face to conform to this aggressive ideal, even when it puts them in dangerous, illogical, or self-destructive situations. The underlying idea that not engaging in a physical confrontation makes you less of a man, or even not a man at all, is a core tenet of this toxic mindset,
Yeah.
trapping men in a cycle of reactive aggression rather than thoughtful response.
That's incredibly insightful into the subtle and overt pressures men face. Moving on, what's the fourth characteristic trait of toxic masculinity? This seems related to the always in control idea.
It is. The fourth trait is the refusal to ask for help.
Ah, the go it alone mandate.
Exactly. According to the tenets of toxic masculinity, men must be entirely self-sufficient, utterly independent, and capable of handling everything on their own. This means they are often conditioned to believe they can never ask for help.
Never.
Even if someone else could do a better job, or if they simply lack the specific ability, knowledge, or resources to accomplish what they're attempting. The act of seeking assistance is equated with weakness or incompetence.
We've all heard the common cliche about men refusing to ask for directions, even when hopelessly lost. Is that a simple, everyday example of this trait playing out?
It's a perfect, almost comically relatable everyday example. But the implications of this trait are far from humorous. They can lead to significant negative outcomes, such as severe burnout, intense frustration, feeling completely overwhelmed by responsibilities.
Yeah, real consequences.
Or ultimately failing to achieve something that would genuinely benefit from assistance. while challenging yourself to figure something out or pushing through to finish a difficult job independently can certainly be valuable and build competence.
Sure, self-reliance has its place.
It's also crucial, and a sign of true wisdom, to know when you're pushing yourself too far or when you simply don't have the necessary skills or resources to perform well on something important.
Right. Knowing your limits is smart.
In healthy masculinity, understanding when and how to ask for help is seen as a strength, a strategic decision that allows for better outcomes and fosters collaboration. Toxic masculinity, however, doesn't allow for this nuanced understanding. It's a rigid rule that can prevent men from achieving their full potential and cause unnecessary suffering.
And following that, what about self-care and admitting sickness? It seems like another area where strength is misinterpreted, maybe even dangerously so.
That's our fifth point, and it's deeply connected to the previous one. Some men, under the pervasive influence of toxic masculinity, genuinely believe that taking care of themselves, whether physically, mentally, or emotionally, is an act of weakness, a self-indulgence that real men don't engage in.
Self-care weakness. Wow.
Yeah. This leads them to neglect fundamental self-care practices. They might not eat a balanced diet, drink enough water, get sufficient sleep, or engage in regular exercise that would significantly improve their physical and mental health.
Basic health stuff.
Basic health stuff. Broadly defined, self-care is often considered unmanly, so when they're feeling run down, ill, or emotionally depleted, they're unlikely to take a break, rest, or do anything that would help them recover and recharge.
Just power through it.
Power through, exactly.
And this has serious, even life-threatening medical and psychological implications, right?
Yeah.
It extends beyond just feeling tired or unwell.
Absolutely. This refusal to prioritize and engage in self-care extends directly and dangerously to seeking medical help. Men with these beliefs are far less likely to go to the doctor for regular checkups, to schedule preventative screenings, or to seek help promptly when they notice something is wrong with their health.
So ignoring symptoms.
Ignoring symptoms, minimizing pain. In their minds, admitting a physical problem, acknowledging pain, or asking for professional medical help is unmanly, or a sign of vulnerability they cannot afford to display.
Good grief.
This mindset directly contributes to men experiencing higher rates of preventable health problems, chronic illnesses going undiagnosed until they are severe, and tragically, higher rates of preventable deaths compared to women.
That's staggering.
It's a self-destructive consequence of this rigid worldview, where a perceived image of imperviousness is prioritized over actual health and longevity. It's a profound, often silent tragedy.
Next up, the idea of rigid gender roles. This feels like a very pervasive and deeply ingrained aspect of toxic masculinity, shaping expectations for both men and women.
It absolutely is, and is one of the most foundational tenets of toxic masculinity. This belief system asserts that men and women are inherently, fundamentally different.
The Mars and Venus's idea, basically.
Sort of, yeah, but taken to an extreme. Not just biologically, but in their capabilities, desires, and appropriate societal functions. Therefore, it's considered natural and even morally correct for them to conform to very rigid traditional roles. Men, as the primary providers and protectors, strong and unemotional.
The stoic breadwinner.
And women as the homemakers, nurturers, and emotional caregivers who take care of the home and family. Within this framework, men's needs and desires are often implicitly or explicitly prioritized, and women are expected to cater to them, often at a significant cost to their own aspirations, independence, and well-being.
And if you don't fit the mold...
If a man or a woman expresses discontent with these prescribed gender roles, or attempts to follow their own interests that diverge from these traditional paths, they can face strong societal discouragement, judgment, and even active suppression.
But is there any biological or scientific basis for these highly rigid traditional roles? Or is it truly, as we discussed earlier, a social construct?
Our sources are unequivocal on this.
Yeah.
There isn't any biological truth to this belief whatsoever. It is a purely social construct.
Okay. Built over time.
Built on historical power dynamics and cultural norms, not on inherent biological differences in capabilities or emotional range. This construct severely limits what both men and women are able to do with their lives and stifles their full potential.
How does it limit men specifically?
Men who constantly feel they have to be the sole, unwavering protector and provider can become utterly exhausted, burdened by an impossible weight. There will inevitably be times when they genuinely cannot provide due to circumstances beyond their control, like job loss, injury, illness, or economic downturns.
Life happens.
Right. In healthy relationships, they might want to turn to their partner for reassurance, emotional support, or to make joint decisions. But Toxic masculinity dictates that this is unacceptable, making them feel isolated and driving a wedge into intimacy.
Cuts off support.
Exactly. This framework places severe artificial limits on what men feel capable of doing, while also implicitly or explicitly encouraging them to restrict the lives, choices, and aspirations of the women around them, perpetuating inequality and resentment.
This sounds uncannily similar to the Superman idea that was brought up in the Say Less video, specifically in the context of Ghanaian cultural expectations for men.
Oh, it's a perfect match.
Can you connect that for us and elaborate?
The Say Less discussion perfectly encapsulates this rigid expectation and its draining effects. The Ghanaian cultural ideal of a man, as described in the video, is essentially a Superman.
Right. Invincible.
He's portrayed as the magician of the house, someone who can lift anything, who must make magic cash happen for school fees and household needs, and critically, he must never fail and must know everything.
Impossible standards.
Totally. They explicitly state, and I quote, "You can't say no, and you can't say it's not possible." This cultural conditioning creates an incredibly draining, impossible set of expectations, forcing men into a role where they can never show vulnerability, weakness, or even a simple lack of knowledge or capability.
Yeah. No room for error.
This entire construct is rooted deeply in these rigid, limiting definitions of masculinity, creating immense internal pressure and external performance anxiety. It's a perfect real-world example of how these beliefs play out culturally, leading to an unsustainable burden on men.
Okay, for a final point on the core traits of toxic masculinity, what's next? It feels like we're building towards the ultimate impact of all these combined pressures, especially how it's enforced.
Our final point, and perhaps one of the most crucial in understanding the perpetuation of this system, is men not participating in unmanly activities and critically actively policing other men who don't conform.
The enforcers, the manliness police.
Kind of, yeah. Men who subscribe to this traditional, narrow notion of manhood often adhere to and enforce very strict and specific beliefs regarding what is acceptable for men to do and what is not.
So it dictates everything from personal expression to hobbies to even household chores. It's truly all-encompassing.
Exactly. These rigid rules affect virtually all areas of a man's life. How he should dress, how he should speak, what jobs he should pursue, which chores are acceptable for him to do around the house, what hobbies he can enjoy, and even what media, movies, music, books he can consume.
Wow. Even media choices.
Oh, yeah. Our sources note that, for example, some men will flat out refuse to take care of their own children, clean up after themselves, or even prepare a meal because they believe these tasks are unmanly and solely the responsibility of women.
That seems incredibly limiting.
It is one of the most pervasive and restrictive aspects of toxic masculinity, as it makes so much of life off limits, creating constant internal and external friction. Men can feel genuinely forced to deny things they naturally enjoy or are good at simply because those interests aren't considered manly enough.
So suppressing your true self again.
Constantly. They can also feel pressured to pretend to be interested in things they don't genuinely care about, like specific sports or car mechanics, just to be a real man and fit in. This leads to incredibly inauthentic, constrained, and ultimately less enjoyable lives.
And how are these attitudes maintained and enforced? Is it just internal pressure, or is there a collective enforcement mechanism at play? You mentioned policing.
Not at all, just internal pressure. These entrenched attitudes about gender persist primarily because they are actively transmitted and rigorously upheld, largely by men policing other men.
Okay, men policing men. How does that work?
Well, studies have shown that the majority of men don't actually enjoy living this way. Many secretly want to engage with their emotions, feel free to express affection, and pursue what they like without worrying if it's masculine enough. The system is self-reinforcing.
Right. Fear keeps it going.
Exactly. Men are primarily responsible for enforcing toxic masculinity by calling out, shaming, mocking, or even punishing those who don't conform to gender norms. Men risk being mocked, humiliated, shamed, excluded from social groups, and even physically attacked by other men if they're considered too feminine or not masculine enough.
Serious consequences for stepping out of line.
Very serious.
Yeah.
And it's not just active shaming. Those who don't enforce rigid gender norms and expectations, those who choose to be accepting or silent risk facing the same negative consequences.
Wow. So even silence is punished.
It can be, yeah. This effectively traps men in ways of acting that they don't enjoy, don't believe in, and which actively harm them, yet they perpetuate the cycle for fear of social reprisal.
It sounds like when you condense all these rules and pressures, it ultimately boils down to one overriding rule for men.
It does. All of these rules, expectations, and conditions condense into one singular, most important, and fundamentally destructive rule for men to follow. Never show weakness.
Never show weakness. The golden rule of toxic masculinity.
Pretty much. But the insidious and truly debilitating part of this rule is that almost anything can be construed as weakness within this rigid framework.
Like what, for example?
From showing emotion to asking for help, from pursuing a non-traditional hobby to expressing affection, almost any authentic human behavior can be reinterpreted as a flaw. This forces men to suppress or deny a vast portion of their authentic selves, leading to lives lived perpetually behind that heavy, limiting suit of armor we discussed earlier, a life that is exhausting, deeply isolating, and which fundamentally prevents genuine connection, true self-confidence, and holistic well-being.
Yeah.
That's a cruel irony. In the pursuit of an image of strength, men are often made incredibly vulnerable and weak in their actual lives.
So we've broken down what toxic masculinity is, identified its core traits, and seen how it manifests. But what are its broader impacts? How does this rigid framework affect not just the individual man, but women, relationships, and society as a whole? The ripple effects must be enormous.
The impacts are indeed incredibly far-reaching and deeply detrimental, extending well beyond the individual man. For the individual man himself, there's a profound and often hidden personal cost. Chronic isolation, deep unhappiness, and significantly increased rates of mental health issues, including anxiety, stress, and clinical depression.
Makes sense, given the suppression.
Exactly, because suppressing emotions, constantly performing a role, and be unable to seek help are direct pathways to psychological distress.
And I believe our sources highlighted some truly stark and heartbreaking statistics regarding these mental health impacts, particularly concerning suicide.
They did. One of the most heartbreaking statistics is on suicide rates, which illustrate the tragic endpoint of this emotional suppression. In the U.S., men died by suicide 3.63 times as often as women in 2019.
3.5 times. Wow.
Yeah. And specifically, middle-aged white men are highlighted as the demographic most likely to die by suicide. This deeply ingrained pressure to man up, to conceal pain at all costs, and to never show weakness creates a deafening silence around mental anguish that can be deadly.
It's a direct consequence.
A direct, tragic consequence of the emotional repression we've been discussing. The perceived strength becomes a fatal weakness. Beyond mental health, these toxic traits can lead to significant academic and professional difficulties for male students and workers. For instance, they might struggle to communicate effectively with classmates on group projects, unable to express their ideas or needs without feeling judged.
Yeah, that hinders teamwork.
Or seeing aggression as the only acceptable form of interaction. This hinders collaborative learning and professional development. There's also a very clear and dangerous link to challenges in seeking help for addiction or substance abuse.
How so?
The lack of accountability in rehab or unwillingness to seek treatment for addiction, seen as a sign of weakness, leads to a higher risk of drug overdose and incarceration. Our sources show that the majority of men in prison in the U.S. are for drug-related crimes.
Wow. Majority.
Highlighting this reluctance to seek help for substance use disorders, even when their lives depend on it. This perpetuates a cycle of harm for the individual and the broader community.
That's an enormous heavy toll on the individual man. But you mentioned the impact extends far beyond the man himself. How does toxic masculinity affect women, relationships, and society at large? It seems like it must create systemic issues.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Toxic masculinity's impact extends far beyond the individual man to create pervasive societal harm. Women are disproportionately and negatively affected even if they're not directly close to someone with these specific beliefs.
Why? How does that happen?
Because it contributes directly to men feeling entitled to control or validated in abusive and violent behavior towards women. The statistics are stark and irrefutable. In 2017, 93% of murdered female victims in the U.S. were killed by male perpetrators they knew.
93%. Killed by someone they knew.
Yeah. And the World Health Organization reported that approximately 38% of all murdered women globally in 2017 were killed by an intimate male partner.
Nearly 40% globally by a partner.
These numbers paint a clear and horrifying picture of the severe risk toxic masculinity, with its emphasis on control and dominance, poses to women's safety and lives.
It's chilling.
Beyond violence, toxic masculinity also perpetuates broader discrimination and inequality. While healthy masculinity is not sexist and promotes equality.
Right, the healthy version embraces equality.
Toxic masculinity, however, actively fosters discrimination against anyone who doesn't conform to its narrow gender roles, especially those who are not heterosexual. It stigmatizes homosexuality and transgender individuals in a desperate attempt to maintain an image of superiority and rigid domination, creating environments of fear and exclusion.
So it fuels homophobia and transphobia, too.
Directly. It also directly supports and reinforces anti-feminist beliefs, promoting the notion that men are inherently superior to women, leading to chauvinism, an excessive and unreasonable sense of male superiority that dismisses and devalues women's contributions and autonomy.
Okay. And societal level issues. Crime.
On a broader societal level, the numbers are equally troubling and interconnected. Males comprise over 90% of violent criminal perpetrators in the U.S.
Over 90%.
There's a high correlation with drug-related crime. As mentioned, most men in prison are for drug-related offenses, often stemming from an inability to seek help for addiction. And it's deeply linked to antisocial behavior, such as physical assault for perceived insults, even when no insult was intended, simply because a man feels compelled to assert dominance.
Just reacting aggressively.
Our sources strongly emphasize that inequality, particularly when driven by toxic masculine beliefs, is inherently dangerous. Anyone considered unequal or less than in this framework is at an increased risk of violence because they are often dehumanized, stripped of their inherent worth.
Dehumanization makes violence easier.
Tragically, yes. When these beliefs are widespread in a society, very few truly benefit. Relationships, both personal and societal, remain largely superficial, preventing deep connection, trust, and the collaborative problem-solving necessary for a healthy, functioning community.
So if it's not inherent or genetic, if men aren't born with these toxic traits, where does toxic masculinity actually come from? How are these harmful norms established, transmitted, and reinforced across generations and cultures?
That's a crucial question, because understanding the origin helps us understand how to dismantle it. It's vital to reconfirm that toxic masculinity is not inherent or genetic.
Right. Not born this way.
Not born this way. It's not something men are born with, nor is it a universal truth of maleness. Instead, it's a societal perception, a set of learned behaviors and expectations that have developed over millennia. It's deeply influenced by complex interactions of culture, religion, historical economic conditions, and even political systems.
So a mix of factors over a long time.
Exactly. And significantly, it can vary quite significantly across different age groups, social classes, and geographical regions. What's considered manly in one village in rural Africa might be very different from a bustling metropolis in East Asia or a small town in the American Midwest.
And sometimes people even justify these deeply ingrained beliefs and rigid gender roles using religion or long-standing cultural traditions, don't they? They argue this is just how it's always been, or this is what our faith teaches.
Yes, they absolutely do. Our sources acknowledge that some people quite sincerely justify toxic masculinity and rigid gender roles based on specific interpretations of religious texts or long-standing cultural traditions, which may indeed appear to normalize patriarchy and misogyny.
But does that make it right or healthy?
That's the key question. The counter-argument is equally strong and essential. This historical or traditional justification does not automatically make those beliefs healthy, positive, or beneficial for anyone involved.
Right. Tradition isn't always good.
Every major religion, for instance, has diverse interpretations, and many religious leaders and scholars actively teach principles of equality, tolerance, and acceptance for all individuals, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. Furthermore, cultures are never static entities. They are dynamic, constantly evolving.
Cultures change.
And have always adapted to new understandings of human well-being and what types of behavior benefit the majority. This includes developing healthier, more equitable beliefs towards genders and masculinity over time.
So change is possible, even with deep roots.
Absolutely. While belonging to cultures with deeply traditional beliefs can certainly act as a strong barrier to challenging these ingrained ideas, because the social pressure to conform can be immense, there are countless examples of groups and individuals who have successfully challenged and changed their beliefs and behaviors, often leading to profoundly more fulfilling lives.
Proof of concept.
This demonstrates that even the most deeply ingrained beliefs about masculinity and gender roles can be challenged and, crucially, unlearned and replaced with healthier alternatives. It requires courage, self-reflection, and often stepping outside of comfortable norms.
This reminds me so much of a really poignant part of the Say Less YouTube discussion, where they specifically talked about culture's powerful, almost inescapable influence on how men perceive themselves and their roles.
Yeah, that part really hit home.
What did they highlight about that?
That discussion truly brought this point home with raw honesty and relatability. One of the participants in Say Less, explicitly stated, and I found this so impactful, unless you come from Ghana, you be that Superman. You get choice.
Wow, you get choice, implying they don't feel they do.
Exactly. This speaks to the immense societal and cultural pressure that dictates what a man should be, making it seem like for some there's simply no escape from these specific, demanding expectations. They also discussed how this pressure extends directly into economic realities.
Like the iPhone example.
Yeah, with the pervasive fear of what others will say, phrases like, "you not be anybody if you don't conform," driving men to make extensive purchases, like needing to own the latest iPhone 15 to create a false sense of what it means to be a man, even if it's financially unsustainable and plunges them into debt.
Keeping up appearances at all costs.
It's the profound fear of ridicule, of being shamed or being seen as less than, that often keeps men trapped in these cycles, reinforcing these toxic norms from generation to generation through powerful peer pressure and deeply ingrained cultural expectations. The idea that society makes you masculine rather than you choosing your path, and the deep-seated fear of judgment, truly traps men in roles they don't enjoy and that actively work against their well-being.
So if that's what toxic masculinity looks like, this deeply restrictive, even punishing framework, and that's what it does to individuals in society, what's the alternative? How do we actively build and embody healthy, authentic masculinity? What are its core principles?
The alternative is a truly liberating one. It's about embracing core principles that allow men to be their authentic selves, to flourish, and to actively dismantle harmful stereotypes. The first and foundational principle is emotional intelligence.
Okay. EI, big one.
Huge. Healthy masculinity promotes and values emotional awareness. It actively encourages men to be in touch with their full range of feelings: joy, sorrow, frustration, empathy, fear, tenderness, and crucially, to communicate those feelings openly, honestly, and effectively.
Actually talking about feeling.
Yes, this leads to men who are able to feel and engage in genuine empathy, which is absolutely crucial for building healthy relationships, understanding others, and achieving profound self-understanding. It's about being truly present in your emotional landscape.
Right, not shut down.
For example, instead of bottling up frustration, an emotionally intelligent man might say, "I'm feeling really frustrated right now with this situation, and I need a moment to collect my thoughts before we discuss it further."
Clear, calm communication. Nice.
So it's about expression and understanding, not suppression and denial. What's the second core principle?
Second, healthy masculinity champions equality and mutual respect.
Okay. Respect for everyone.
It promotes an environment where there is genuine respect for oneself and for all others, regardless of their gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, race, or background. This means actively rejecting sexism, misogyny, homophobia, and any form of discrimination.
Actively rejecting it, not just passively ignoring it.
Exactly. Instead, it elevates the principle of equality and recognizes the inherent worth and uniqueness of every individual's identity. It understands that true strength comes from uplifting others, not diminishing them.
And then authenticity. That seems pivotal after all the talk about suits of armor and pretending.
Yes, authenticity and self-expression are absolutely key. Healthy masculinity upholds the fundamental belief that each individual has unique interests, passions, and strengths, irrespective of traditional gender roles or expectations.
Be yourself, basically.
Pretty much. It actively encourages men in their individuality, giving them permission to pursue their preferences and passions, whether that's a love for cooking, a talent for dance, an interest in fashion, or simply enjoying a particular type of movie or art, without fear of being teased, shamed, or judged for not conforming to a narrow, outdated, manly ideal.
Letting go of the man box.
Exactly. It's about not denying vital parts of who you are to fit into someone else's box. It's the freedom to explore and embrace all facets of your personality.
Fourth, healthy masculinity actively fosters healthy relationships. This means encouraging dynamics built on true mutual respect, deep trust, clear communication, and enthusiastic consent.
Consent. Crucial.
Absolutely crucial. It involves active listening, offering genuine emotional support to partners, friends, and family, and engaging in collaborative decision-making rather than seeking dominance or control. These are the absolute foundations of truly meaningful, enduring, and nourishing human connections.
And what about accountability and growth? That seems important too.
That's our fifth principle: responsibility and accountability. Healthy masculinity encourages an environment in which men take full responsibility for their behavior, their choices, and their actions.
Owning your stuff.
Owning your stuff. It embraces the capacity to learn from mistakes, to apologize sincerely, and to make amends, rather than simply accepting limiting beliefs like, "that's just how I am," or boys will be boys.
No excuses.
Right. It's about a commitment to continuous growth, self-improvement, and understanding the impact of one's actions on others.
And finally,
Positive role modeling. Healthy masculinity actively encourages men to be positive, inspiring role models for upcoming generations of young men by actively demonstrating all these qualities in their daily lives.
leading by example.
Exactly. It's about leading by example, shaping a better, more inclusive, and more compassionate future for masculinity, showing that strength comes in many forms beyond outdated stereotypes.
This all sounds incredibly beneficial and liberating in theory, but what does it look like in action? Can you give us some concrete, practical examples of how to adopt healthy masculinity in daily life, how a man might start shedding that armor?
Absolutely. Adopting healthy masculinity means giving yourself explicit permission to do things, even if you, or others, might not initially think they're manly enough.
Okay, permission granted.
And crucially, it means not doing things specifically just to prove how manly you are, particularly if those actions are harmful or inauthentic. It's about reinterpreting traditionally positive masculine traits in a broader, more flexible, and healthier light.
Reinterpreting. Got it. Like how?
For instance, if you genuinely value the masculine trait of wanting to protect your family, this can extend far beyond physical defense or financial provision.
Right. Broader protection.
It can include protecting them from disease by meticulously preparing healthy, nutritious meals, ensuring they have access to good education and emotional support, or actively working to create a psychologically safe and emotionally secure environment at home where everyone feels valued.
Taking care in different ways.
Exactly. If you value bravery, that can mean having uncomfortable but necessary conversations with loved ones about difficult topics.
Emotional courage.
Or it can mean having the courage to ask for help, whether it's for a complex task at work or for emotional support, even when your instinct is to try to do something alone. That takes a deep, often underestimated kind of courage.
So bravery isn't just about facing physical danger, it's about emotional and intellectual courage too.
Not at all. And if you aim for discipline, a trait often associated with masculine strength, that can include taking meticulous care of your physical health by consistently eating vegetables, prioritizing balanced nutrition, and engaging in regular exercise.
Discipline for health. Makes sense.
But equally, it means disciplined self-care for your mental health. Taking breaks when you're feeling overwhelmed, practicing mindfulness, or seeking therapy when you need it, rather than pushing through to burnout.
Mental health discipline.
Yes, these are all profound acts of discipline and self-care that demonstrate true, sustainable strength, not weakness. Healthy masculinity empowers you to choose actions that genuinely serve your well-being and the well-being of those around you, rather than being dictated by external, limiting norms.
This is truly making me reflect on my own life, and I'm sure many of our listeners are recognizing ways they already practice healthy masculinity, perhaps without even having a label for it.
That's precisely the goal. We encourage you, our listener, to identify those ways you already practice healthy masculinity in your life. Perhaps you're already emotionally supportive, you consistently take responsibility for your actions, or you're a fantastic listener.
Recognize your strengths.
Recognize these as your existing strengths. Celebrate them, and then consider how you can expand and use these strengths in even more areas of your life, giving yourself full permission to be a more authentic, whole, and genuinely powerful man.
And the benefits. What are the outcomes of embracing this?
The direct, tangible benefits of making this shift are profound and life-changing. You'll experience increased life satisfaction, a deeper sense of authenticity, significantly enhanced self-esteem that comes from within, and a marked decrease in rates of mental health problems such as anxiety, stress, and depression. It's a pathway to genuine flourishing.
That is a truly powerful statement. It makes me think the future isn't about making men soft, it's about making men whole.
Exactly.
Whole. Strong and sensitive, brave and kind, competitive and cooperative. That's real masculinity. That's the version that builds families, communities, and a better world for everyone.
Well said.
So we've gained a comprehensive understanding of what toxic masculinity is, its far-reaching impacts, and what healthy masculinity looks like. But how do we actually undo those toxic patterns? What are the mindset shifts, the internal work, and the external support systems needed to genuinely dismantle these deeply ingrained beliefs, both within ourselves and in society?
That's the critical next step, isn't it? And it's a journey, not a quick fix. One of the most effective ways to begin moving away from unhealthy and limiting beliefs about masculinity is to truly, deeply realize the harm they do.
The harm they cause.
And this isn't just about the harm to other people, which is significant, but the profound, insidious harm they inflict upon yourself, often without any implied benefits whatsoever.
So it's about deconstructing those false rewards you mentioned earlier, the illusion of benefit from adhering to toxic norms, like thinking it makes you respected.
Precisely. The underlying assumption that drives toxic masculinity, that by denying parts of oneself, by suppressing emotions, by gaining power and control over others, and by rigidly avoiding anything feminine or perceived as weak, you will inevitably lead a happy, respected, and adored life, is fundamentally, unequivocally false.
It just doesn't work that way.
It doesn't. While some people may submit to aggression or defer to perceived strength out of fear, this is not the same as earning genuine respect, admiration, or affection.
Fear isn't respect.
Not at all. In fact, toxic masculinity is far more likely to drive people away, leading to isolation and resentment, or to instill fear in those who are less capable of leaving, such as partners, children, or colleagues. The cost to the individual man is incredibly high, involving emotional impoverishment and relationship superficiality, and the rewards are, in fact, quite limited, temporary, and often illusory.
So how do you start undoing it personally? Where does that begin?
The path to undoing this begins with deep self-awareness and courageous questioning. We encourage you to start paying very close attention to your own thoughts and impulses throughout your day.
Paying attention, mindfulness, almost.
Kind of, yeah. What do you stop yourself from doing? Why? For instance, if you feel a genuine urge to give a friend or family member a compliment, offer a hug, or express affection, but you stop yourself because you don't want to seem too affectionate or too feminine, really pause and ask yourself if these thoughts are truly justified.
Question the internal censor.
Exactly. What do you really stand to lose by expressing genuine connection? And what do you gain by holding on to those restrictive thoughts?
It's about challenging those automatic, often unconscious reactions and impulses that have been conditioned over years.
Exactly. Pay attention to your instinctual reactions, especially the ones that feel disproportionate or unhelpful, and genuinely consider if they're truly appropriate or serving your well-being.
Like the bar bump example.
Yeah, perfect example. If someone accidentally brushes past you at a bar or knocks into you, and your immediate visceral reaction is intense anger or a desire for confrontation, ask yourself if that anger is genuinely necessary. Or if you're feeling that way, simply to maintain a certain tough image, to prove something to yourself or unseen observers.
Check the motivation.
Then, and this is crucial, it's about actively expanding your personal definition of man. Reconsider masculinity and wholeheartedly accept that people can be manly, truly strong, capable, and admirable, even if they openly acknowledge their emotions, have interests and hobbies that aren't traditionally associated with men, or actively choose to avoid aggressive confrontation in favor of dialogue.
Broaden the definition.
Expand your view of what it means to be a man to include many different ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving so you feel capable of and comfortable doing what feels right for you, without being limited by outdated notions of masculinity. This is your personal liberation.
You mentioned earlier that vulnerability is often confused with weakness, but that in reality, it's a profound strength. Let's really dig into that because it feels like a cornerstone of true personal change in this area. It's terrifying for many.
It is absolutely terrifying for many, and that fear is precisely why it's such a powerful point of growth. Being vulnerable is often and incorrectly confused with being weak, exposed, or easily hurt.
Right. That's the common perception.
But it is, in fact, a profound strength. It takes immense courage to open yourself up. Vulnerability involves having difficult, emotionally charged conversations where you don't know the outcome, revealing your true thoughts and feelings without putting up a strong, impenetrable front, acknowledging your fears or doubts.
Making emotional risks.
Yes. It includes things like genuinely apologizing to someone after hurting them and taking the courageous step of explaining why you reacted the way you did, without making excuses. It involves thanking someone and truly acknowledging how important their actions or presence were to you. And of course, it involves asking for help when you genuinely need it, which requires admitting a limitation.
So lots of different forms of vulnerability.
Absolutely. It's important to acknowledge that what feels vulnerable is deeply personal and different for everyone. For some, revealing a favorite movie that might be considered unmanly could feel incredibly vulnerable because they're worried about being teased or judged.
Right. Small things can feel big.
For others, that's a non-issue, but sharing a deep-seated fear might be terrifying. The essence of vulnerability is letting others truly know who you are without your armor.
Taking the armor off.
This can feel incredibly risky, precisely because you are opening yourself up to potential rejection, criticism, or misunderstanding. But that risk is absolutely necessary for developing genuine, deep, and lasting relationships, and for building true, sustainable self-confidence that isn't dependent on an external facade.
Real confidence needs real connection.
Being your authentic self can feel dangerous, but it is absolutely necessary for developing a real, robust understanding of who you are and for others to truly connect with you.
Making any kind of deep personal change, especially in mindset and ingrained behaviors, is incredibly difficult. What kind of support systems are available for someone trying to embark on this journey? It seems hard to do alone.
You're absolutely right, it's tough. And it often feels like an uphill battle against years of conditioning. And it's even more challenging if you're not used to listening to and learning from your emotions, or if you've been taught to ignore them.
Yeah, if you're out of practice.
While some people are remarkably able to make significant changes on their own through self-reflection and personal discipline, many, many more make much more significant and lasting progress by working with a professional.
Okay. Professional help, like therapy.
Therapy, counseling, coaching, yes. What's the role of a professional, like a therapist or counselor, in this journey of deconstruction and rebuilding?
Yeah, what do they bring to the table?
Professionals bring invaluable tools and perspectives. They know what questions to ask to help you recognize unhealthy beliefs and attitudes that you might not even be consciously aware of because they're so deeply ingrained.
They help uncover the blind spots.
Exactly. They can suggest specific exercises, thought experiments, and behavioral changes that help you discover new things about yourself and break old patterns. Crucially, they can act as an objective, compassionate accountability partner, providing consistent feedback on where you're making progress, where you're still facing challenges, and areas where you still have work to do.
Someone to guide and check in.
Yes. If you're seeking therapy, it's essential to find a therapist you feel comfortable with, someone who creates a safe space, and ideally one who specializes in male therapy or gender identity concerns. The incredibly good news is, it is absolutely possible to harness and express what we might call manpower, your inherent strength, drive, and capabilities, in a healthy, productive, and deeply fulfilling way that benefits yourself and everyone around you.
Harnessing it healthily, I like that.
As you embark on this journey of change, it's incredibly important to cultivate patience with yourself. Changing deeply ingrained habits, beliefs, and emotional responses is often much more difficult and takes far longer than you might initially expect.
Right. It's not overnight. Be patient.
Definitely. There will be moments where you catch yourself reverting to old, limiting patterns of thinking or behaving. When this happens, simply acknowledge it without self-recrimination. Don't beat yourself up. Don't descend into self-criticism.
Just notice it.
Just notice that you responded automatically, or that an old thought pattern surfaced. Now that you're paying attention, you can gently correct yourself. Make a conscious choice to respond differently and choose a different, healthier path. Each conscious choice, however small, reinforces the new path.
So it's a continuous process, a journey of self-discovery and refinement, not a one-time fix. But why is it so worth it, despite the discomfort and the persistence it demands?
Although it can be difficult, uncomfortable, and challenging, pushing you outside your comfort zone, making these positive changes, is profoundly, unequivocally worth the effort.
Why? What's the payoff?
It brings about significant, lasting improvements to your own life, your mental health, your self-perception, your sense of purpose, and crucially, to the lives of the people around you. Choosing to give up limiting, outdated beliefs about masculinity can feel truly liberating.
Liberating? How so?
It means not living a life designed purely to please others, or to slavishly follow rules that aren't authentically your own, or that actively harm you. Instead of constantly carrying around the fear of being ridiculed for doing something that isn't considered manly enough, like being calm and compassionate with your children, allowing yourself to feel emotional if your partner says something hurtful, showing genuine compassion to a friend going through a hard time, or simply asking someone for help when you're overwhelmed.
Letting go of that fear.
You realize that these fears are rooted in an unhealthy mindset, often imposed on others with painful, lifelong consequences. There can be very understandable reasons for conforming to traditional or widespread versions of masculinity, particularly due to immense societal pressure and the fear of exclusion or punishment. However, you have an immense amount to gain, a world of possibility to unlock, by distancing yourself from these limiting beliefs.
Facing the resistance is part of it?
It might be. It might not be easy, and you could certainly face resistance from others who are comfortable with the old norms. But it's also entirely possible that by bravely choosing to change your perspective of masculinity and how you embody it, you could become an inspiring example, motivate others around you, make the people closest to you incredibly happy by being more present and authentic, and fundamentally improve your own life and relationships in ways you might not yet even imagine.
And what a powerful way to put it. Life is simply better when you feel truly free to live it the way you want, without setting unnecessary limits on yourself and without projecting unfair, limiting expectations on others. That freedom is invaluable.
Absolutely. That freedom is the goal.
And that wraps up another illuminating deep dive. We truly unpacked a complex and profoundly important topic today, extracting so much valuable insight from our sources on the often misunderstood landscape of toxic versus healthy masculinity.
We did indeed. The core message we hope you take away, the enduring insight from this deep dive is this: masculinity itself is not the problem.
Right. Not inherently toxic.
It is inherently neutral, with many positive expressions. The problem arises when masculinity turns toxic through a narrow, harmful, and rigid definition that prioritizes control, suppression, and dominance over authenticity and connection. Remember, the crucial line is drawn at intention and impact.
Intention and impact. Okay.
Ask yourself, is the behavior uplifting and empowering, or is it controlling and diminishing? Is it rooted in genuine self-confidence and inner security, or does it stem from deep insecurity, fear, and a need to prove something? Does it genuinely respect others as equals, or does it degrade and devalue them?
Those are the key questions to ask. So as you go about your day, we invite you, our listener, to reflect. What stands out to you most from this deep dive? How might rethinking your interpretation of masculinity, whether your own or what you expect from others, be incredibly valuable in your own life or in supporting the men and boys around you?
Yeah, what's one small step?
We encourage you to reflect on those small, actionable steps, however seemingly insignificant, you can take towards a more authentic, whole, and genuinely healthy version of masculinity for yourself and for those you interact with.
Continue to explore these concepts, observe how they play out in the world around you, maybe in movies, in your workplace, in your family, and consider the quiet strength that comes from being truly, authentically yourself. Your journey towards a healthier understanding and expression of masculinity is a powerful step towards building a better, more equitable, and more compassionate world for everyone.